Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, presented by the Justice Brothers, makers of fine additives, cleaners, and lubricants for the automotive, heavy equipment, agricultural, and industrial worlds, plus our dear, dear friends at Cooper Tires. This is our main retro feature for the week of the 2019 Rolex 24 at Daytona. And we are indeed going back 30 years, the 30th anniversary of Jim Busby and Busby Racing's overall win, the 1989 Sunbank 24 at Daytona. So many things to mention about what took place at that race. Very fortunate to have spent more than an hour on the phone with Jim Busby, an epic storyteller. Amazing the minutia that he happens to remember. Also spoke with our pal Alvin Springer from Andial, also the longtime Porsche Motorsports North America boss, still an advisor today. Also spoke with our friend John Andretti, has just gone through another very serious surgery trying to rid himself of cancer. Close a conversation with Mike Colucci, the great crew chief of this winning effort, many winning efforts at Daytona, just North American sports car racing, endurance racing. Mike Colucci's name is on so many championships and wins, this one included, he's also happened to be restoring this winning car from 1989, which Jim gets into. This event, boy, it was all kinds of awesome from a competition standpoint. Nissan, coming off of its dominant 1988 season, was on pole by a mile. Jaguars were super quick. All-American Racers was just getting off the ground with its Toyota GTP program. Of course, there was the bevy of Porsche 962s, very long in the tooth by 1989. But as we get into here with Jim and Mike a bit, customization was really the name of the game back then, knowing that the rules allowed manufacturers to either make their own developments on their factory cars. Teams as well that happened to own some of these aging 962s also had almost carte blanche to do what they wanted to, tweak the aero, redo the chassis, start from scratch, you name it. Part of the things that made the GTP series so awesome. One car could be very different from the next car despite all coming from the same factory. This is a big part of what led this Busby Racing 962 team to truly kick a lot of behind in 1989. Fun stuff that they will tell you about here as the race developed on, turned into a Busby 962 versus Jaguar fight. We also had a second Busby entry. Other than it's just normal, number 67 car, driven by Derek Bell, the great and late Bob Wollek, and John Andretti. We had Mario and Michael Andretti in the number 68 as part of a tribute entry, you could almost call it that, in honor of the late Al Holbert, who had just passed in September of 1988. So a two-car entry sponsored by Miller Brewing Company, which is also carried over from Al Holbert's team. So many interesting aspects to this race. Also an admission or two from John Andretti. Jaguar, the lead Jaguar, had an overheating problem that really hampered their ability to go maximum attack. Mr. Andretti admits in here that he might have helped him with that problem a little bit. We also look at some of the great milestones that were hit, talking about Derek Bell's final 24-hour win, someone who had won so many Rolex 24s, won the 24 Hours of Le Mans so many times. This was his farewell, at least, to victory lane at major 24-hour events. It was also Porsche's 50th victory with the Porsche 962 in a span of about 5 years. 50 victories for the 962 chassis. Just amazing. There was the fog, which took the race down for almost 4 hours. Too foggy to drive, so this was one to remember. And spinning between our interviewees, Jim Busby, Alwin Springer, John Andretti, and Mike Colucci. I hope you enjoy everything that is here. Our big pre-2019 Rolex 24 retro feature on the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. So I figure we might just start by talking about the 1988 race. And I know how your team, your Porsche 962 team, was very competitive. Don't know if there was a feeling of one that got away with Jaguar winning in 88, but before we get to 89 and that 30th anniversary, Jim, maybe let's talk about your thoughts coming out of the 1988 24 Hours of Daytona.
I think we could actually, if you on that theme, you could go back to '85, where we basically, Rick Knoop and I and Mass essentially led every bit of the race. And we had decided before the race to take the Porsche exhaust system off and put on an exhaust system with an expandable port in the center pipe, because they were cracking exhausts. So we led that, we dominated that race by far in '85. And at about, I'm going to say there must have been about 4 hours to go, 5 hours to go. And it was clear that at the pace we were going, that we were right on pace to hold the lead. Center port, the exhaust pipe came out. The actual pipe came apart. And we came in, changed the pipe quickly back to the factory unit on the side that broke or came undone. And I think we came back to second or third. I don't remember, but it was right there. It was somewhere up at the front. So that was very disappointing. And then '86, we ran at the front all the time. And I had run at the front at that race so many times that I couldn't believe that all the podiums that I'd had, that I'd never won it.
Yeah.
So then in '87, I think Morton and I were driving together, and we did drop a valve, but we were leading. And so it just got to a point where I thought, where is this all going to go? So then I stopped driving and really went into sponsorship getting and team management. And I was 46 or 47 years old at the time. So it was just time. And I hired in '88, we had now changed over to the C tubs. We'd built our own tubs, torsional rigidity in the engine compartment, changed the aero. In '88, we actually went back to the side intercoolers to lower the center of gravity. We really did our homework and made some aero changes. And we came there in '88, and I think it was Wollek, maybe Baldy, and Redmond, I think, was our team. And Bob didn't get his hour change right, and he did not come to qualify the car in '88. And Mario Baldi walks in, has never been in this car. And Brian, we didn't plan on using him for qualifying, so he wasn't there. And Baldi comes walking in from his flight at the Daytona airport with his driving bag and sets it down and says, "What's up?" And we said, "Here's what's up. You're in the car." And he said, "Wait, I don't, show me the car. I've never been in the car. I don't know what to do." And I said, "Just leave the boost right where I've set it. It's good. It's got plenty of boost. Everything's fine. Just go out there and drive the car as best you can. You were here a couple of years ago. You know the track." Well, he put it on the pole. 3 laps in, he turned the fastest lap, and it held for pole. And we went off in that race and basically dominated. I mean, the domination was so obvious that we began, changing stints and more careful on the brakes and doing everything you can do to go for 24 hours, shifting shorter, and we're continuing to pull away. And on the final stop, Redmond got in the car, and God love him, he's the best there is, and I would never, I've laughed about this with him several times. He didn't pump the brakes after the brake change, and he went down to the end of the pit lane and put the brakes down to the floor and ran into the guardrail, leaving the pits. He wasn't even out on the track.
Yeah.
And it knocked the nose off, and you can't back up. So even though we had a significant lead, he had to go all the way around the racetrack, dragging the subframe and the nose. And he came back in, and we changed the subframe as quickly as we could, put a different nose on it, went back out, and I don't know, we were either second or third. I don't know where we were, but it was just a shocker, a real shocker. But that was the same car that won in '89. And what we had done is built our own chassis, honeycomb chassis. We changed the engine bay to have structural rigidity in it, by using a triangulated piece underneath the engine to change the torsional rigidity, and probably increased it by about 35 to 40%.
Wow.
And the genesis of the honeycomb tub was the spa accident with, the poor kid, Beloff, when the tub folded up over him. And then Winkelhock in Canada, when the tub folded up over him. And then in '86, I was qualifying in Miami and tagged the inside, trying to push the apex a little too tight, touched it, went across the track, and folded the tub over my right shoulder. And after that accident, we sent the car up to Dave Clem's, because that was when we used to qualify on one weekend and race on the next at Miami. And he repaired the tub, and it came back, and we ran the race. And I don't know where we finished.
Fab car, yep.
Yeah, and he took the bent panels out, fixed them, and put it back together, and we raced it. But at that point, I knew we had to do something, and got in touch with my friend Jimmy Chapman, whom you're aware of.
Oh, yeah, the great Jim. And you're also mentioning a time, Jim, where the Porsche 956, the Porsche 962, glorious creation, something you could order straight from the factory, turnkey, genuine key, turnkey race car would show up. But as time went on, and as the 962 began to age a little bit, other cars from other manufacturers either were faster or new innovations. Just about everybody in the paddock had something significant that they were doing that was completely original. So just, to me, a fascinating shift if you look back at this late 80s, even early 90s era where, yes, on the entry list it said Porsche 962, but in reality it was a Busby 962, a Holbert 962.
Right.
Everybody had their own tweaks and ideas.
Well, we began providing Al Holbert with the honeycomb tubs. And I'm not sure whether HR1 was a sheet metal tub by Dave Clem or whether it was one of ours. Al had contacted me after Derek had an accident and said, look, we've got to get one of these honeycomb tubs. And I said, well, Al, it's not just the tub. I mean, that's safety and torsional rigidity to the firewall. That's a really good tool. But the back end of these cars is where the problem is. That's why we're breaking these magnesium bell housings, and that's why Porsche cast up the new aluminum bell housings. I had a magnesium bell housing break at Pocono going into what is Pocono turn 2, but our turn 3. Yeah. Because we went backwards. And the bell housing sheared, the magnesium bell housing sheared and sent me up to the wall, and I must have missed it by an eighth of an inch and spun back down into the infield and then limped into the pits with one of the front wheels all the way off the ground. Jeez. We couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And the bell housing had broken. So it was the torsional loads were going into this magnesium bell housing because the tubes back there were flexing. And that's when we added the torsional rigidity underneath the engine in the engine bay and changed things a lot. But what we were still providing the Chapman tubs to Al. I think he had either 1, 2, or 3. I don't remember how many he ultimately got. And we had at least 3. And when Bob wrecked the car in 87, I want to say, at Sears Point, we blew a right rear tire and hit the guardrail and missed the bridge by about an eighth of an inch. And he went over several times. Broke his shoulder and a couple of ribs. I was standing there when it happened. I still have photos of it. Frightful. Yeah. Frightful experience. Had that been a Porsche tub, Bob would not have survived. There's no way. That was our first Chapman tub. So that was what we wanted to call 108C. Then we built 108C1 and C2. Now, C2 is this 88-89 chassis that had the full torsional engine bay, lightweight body, full aero package at the rear, larger tunnels, lower wing, more like the Nissan type wing, the vented front fenders where it allowed the pressure out, the vented top of the front fenders rather than just louvers. See, the louver looks good, but the high pressure on top of the louver doesn't let much air out.
Yeah.
So we actually ducted it out, and it made an enormous difference in high-speed understeer. We also messed around with the front geometry a little bit, not much, but a little. But mostly the car stopped moving. So the 88 version of the car was a single turbo side intercooler. When we went, and that was with the Ed Pink engines, and they were fabulous, really good. But we went back to Andial because when Porsche got more deeply involved after Al's death, the connection was between Porsche, Andial, and Miller Brewing.
Yeah.
And we made that deal with them, and basically we took over Al's position for the balance of the Miller contract. And Alvin and I, of course, went back to 1976 when we started with the slant port heads and the RSRs and we're winning races and so on. So Alvin and I had a long-running relationship. The only reason we'd ever gone to Ed Pink is, one, I know Ed and he makes fabulous engines. And secondly, I was racing against Al Holbert, who was giving me my engines. And that didn't make any sense to me. So we started doing our own with Ed, and he did a fabulous job. But when it was time to go to the Miller deal after poor Al's passing, we were connected to Porsche, Miller, and back to Alvin, and he built the engine for the 89 version of the same car, but with a very different aero package that we finally finished. We'd been working on it for a long time. And that car, I think you could still say to anybody that ever drove it, will tell you that that was the fastest 962 ever built. It was light. It had a complete aero package that had nothing to do with the original. We actually took, one interesting fact is that the shorter wheelbase of the 956 meant that it had a longer nose.
Sure.
So people didn't realize that was the case. So we took a 962 nose and grafted on a 956 nose and added 4 inches to it, sealed the bottom, put dive planes on it, and used that for testing. And we tested a lot at Riverside, so there was a lot of high-speed testing.
Sure.
And everybody drove the car. I drove the car. Everybody drove the car. And as we moved forward with this aero package, we took a car that was essentially an understeering car that had high-speed oversteer, but it was essentially it was understeering, and we cured it. And it no more understeer, and we could tune the car's total balance with the rear wing. So we lowered the rear wing, increased the size of the tunnels, and really accelerated the air out of the car. And that way at Daytona, we could virtually lay the wing down and go really fast down the straights. And that car was so dominant in that race that had we not had Jaguar pushing us at the very, very end, when we left Bob in the car and did a splash and go, we could have led by a lot more. We just didn't think they'd have the longevity that they did. And it turns out they were reliable. We never, ever counted on them being reliable. We thought, well, we'll cruise, we'll stay in the lead, we'll just hold this nice margin and go conservative on tires and brakes and everything else, and they'll disappear. Well, they didn't disappear. And we made a decision late in the race. It's time for a driver's change, and which will take too long. And we're going to splash and go. Same tires, everything. So the car slides down the pit lane with about a minute lead, and we splash Bob, and he goes, and he drove qualifying laps from out to the finish. He absolutely ran qualifying laps for the last 40 minutes of the race, and we won. And he could because the car would do it. He was wringing its neck, but there was plenty of car left, and it was faster than the Jaguar, period.
So there's some great names involved with this win. Jim. Also some great, I guess, facts and numbers associated with this John Andretti, Derek Bell, Bob Wollek combination.
Yes.
It was the 50th win for the 962.
Which banner hangs in my shop over the workbench today.
I love it. You got to send me a photo of that. And unless I'm forgetting some major 24-hour race afterwards, I believe it was also Derek's final major 24-hour victory, which was, a pretty big thing for him.
Yes.
Bob, obviously brilliant Bob, who we would lose far too soon. A momentous occasion for him. John Andretti as well, who we know is going through the wars these days with cancer. But let's maybe just wind back a little bit to the formation of this team, or this specific squad. John Andretti, Derek Bell, Bob Wollek. First of all, there are definitely some uses of seat inserts across the height ranges of those three, but tell me about the chemistry of these three, because an American, an Englishman, and a Frenchman walk into a bar is a pretty easy joke to start off with. What were they? How'd you come up with a lineup, and how did they come together as a team?
Well, first of all, Bob had been with us for 3 or 4 years, and Bob is, in my estimation, the best sports car driver that ever lived, period. Now, you can throw in any name you want, and I think the two fastest sports car drivers that I ever had on my team or anything to do with were Bob Wollek and John Paul Jr. And so when I already had Bob, and he was going to go on, and remember that at this point, for the last 10 years, I've basically been in the racing business. This was not a wealthy, this was a racing business. And we took in money and made a profit and built cars and raced to win. So, and that was because we always had good sponsorship. BF Goodrich, as you know, was our primary sponsor. And they spent a lot of money and liked results that they were getting, and so on and so forth. Now, that had started at Le Mans in 1982 when I drove their 924 GTR Turbo it was actually a Porsche factory effort, but BF Goodrich painted the car black and silver, and Doc Bundy and I won the GT class the same year that Derek and Jackie Eakes won. Overall, we won GT. So BF Goodrich was very happy. They'd been to Le Mans lots of times with, I think, John Greenwood and a couple other people, and sort of, didn't get the results they would have liked to have gotten. So that was successful. Then they put us together with Mazda, and we ordered Lola cars and put the cars together ourselves with the Mazda's engines, and we won. Our first outing was Monza, 1,000 Ks. We won it in C2, and then we went to Le Mans, won it, and won Le Mans C2, and we finished on the podium, I think, at every other race, Tokyo, everywhere we went. So they were very happy, and we thought we'd go on with that effort, and somewhere along the line, the BF Goodrich people had made an agreement with Porsche. And lo and behold, I get a phone call telling me that we're going to have 962s in 1985 after doing so well with Mazda in 84. So what's beginning to form up here is a sort of cabal where you've got Porsche, you've got BF Goodrich, you've got Andial, you've got Busby, you've got this whole group that is sort of melding together. And they did. And then when Al passed away, we basically, through Miller, who loved Derek, and I love Derek, and just he's not only a great driver, he's a good friend and a nice guy, and I mean, he's the best press that anybody can ever get. So here we are in a position for needing a third driver. Well, the guy who was doing the public relations for Miller at the time came to us. He worked with Holbert, and then he worked with Holbert and Miller, he got to know John Andretti. So here we are kicking names around, and you know, the world's our oyster. We can pick who we want. And we've had some awful good guys. You know, when I think Wollek and how did I drive? I don't know. I drove with all of them, and we raced and we did well. And then when I just retired, I got too old and retired. I thought about Derek Warwick, who I'd driven with at Daytona with I think Bob, and we should have won then, and the car fell apart for some reason. But anyway, I kept thinking of these people, and he called me one day and he said, "What about John Andretti?" And I said, "Well, I don't know too much about him." And he said, "Well, he's kind of been in the BMW program and all this other stuff, and I think he's pretty good. And I'd seen him once or twice. I think he drove with Davy Jones, and they were pretty quick in that BMW."
Oh, yeah.
And but I didn't know if that was John or Davy or or BMW. You just don't know in some of these cases. So John flew out here and met with me, and I talked to him, and I thought, you know what? I really like this guy. So I did some homework, and I talked to some people that had worked with him, and they liked him a lot. And I talked to Michael Andretti, because I'd known him, because he and my son raced in the Indy Light thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to know him, because he and my son became pretty close during that. And when my son crashed and was out of it, mostly because he ran out of money. He got hurt, but he also ran out of money. So anyway, so I was still in touch with the Andretti guys, and I just said, "Tell me about John." And he said, "I think he's pretty good. I think he just hasn't had the openings that he needs to get going." And I said, "Well, okay." So I get a call from Tom. Gosh, I'm so terrible that I can't remember his name. And he says, "I've run it by Miller, and they like it a lot." And I said, "Well, it would be hard not to like the winner Bob Wollek, the winner and timeless statesman Derek Bell, and an Andretti of any description. If you want to sell beer and tires and whatever we got for sale here, that sounds good to me." So we did it. And, of course, right out of the gate, we win the race. We go on and almost win. I think the next one was Palm Beach or something. I don't remember what it was. And I don't know what happened, but we didn't win. I think we got a podium out of that one or something. And it did turn out to just be a really good combination. But going into Daytona, I remember sitting up on the box and watching this all take place during practice and qualifying in the first part of the race. And they all turned the same lap times. They all brought the car back alive. Tire wear was great. You know, sometimes we had an advantage, but most of the times we had a slight disadvantage on tires. Because occasionally we'd hit on a great tire, and that would be it. But Goodyear had so much experience and so much time behind them with all of these things and distance racing and everything that sometimes we were on our back foot. So what we needed was three guys that would just blanket each other lap time wise and had car sensitivity and understood that this car for the last two seasons had clearly been the dominant car. Maybe occasionally a Nissan or somebody would be quicker or a Jag would be quicker, but the bottom line is we had reliability and speed. And the 962s had always had reliability, but they were beginning to lack speed. And this one didn't. You could probably run it against modern sport. I think somebody told me one time, until about 5 years ago, that speeds that car would turn at Daytona were faster than the current winners. So,
that's not a that's not a real question. We got the numbers to prove that.
Right. So I wasn't there, so I didn't know that, but I did get a laugh out of it when I was told. Anyway, that car went on to be restored a few times and probably put on 50 pounds of paint and junk and garbage and parts and pieces and cool suits and all the stuff that happens to these things over the years. But I'm convinced that this restoration that Colucci is doing on it right now with Kevin Jeanette doing the body work, who's going to get, 30 years of paint off of it and get it back down to fighting weight, I would pit that car against anything. And remember that why did all of this begin to happen to develop the Porsche? Well, first of all, reliability was there. Secondly, factory support was there. Thirdly, they had a single engine source, plus Ed Pink occasionally with other teams, even us and then other teams. So they had good reliability and good power. Why did they have good power? Well, the Porsche 2-valve air-cooled engine was really, it's a Volkswagen. I mean, it's a 1947 Volkswagen with extra cylinders and turbocharged.
That's a good point.
And so what happened? Well, Porsche always knew how to cam these things to live. They didn't make horsepower with lots of big cam timing or anything else. They just brought them home alive, pulling hard at the end. We talk about the safety of these cars being instrumental in causing us to build the honeycomb tubs. Well, that's true, but also remember that this was a car that had a sheet metal tub at the time when everybody else did too. It also came out with 600 horsepower. So you had a 600 horsepower sheet metal tub, and guys crashed and didn't get killed, and guys crashed and did get killed, but at no higher rate than any other combination. Well, all at once, through development, Andial, Ed Pink, Porsche, different turbochargers. I mean, Triple K, and we did Garrett turbochargers. We went back to Triple Ks. We were always moving ahead. And finally, Porsche got into their ECU units and began to hop them up. Because remember, the ECU units on these cars were designed to run in Le Mans in, say, 1982, and didn't change. And so we kept updating cars and engines and everything, but we had the same fuel supply, same ignition lead, same boost support for adding fuel. The things didn't change. So, we hopped them up a little bit. We went from a 2.8-liter single turbo to a much larger single turbo. We went to top intercoolers, which cooled the charge better. And the turbochargers got bigger. So we kept adding horsepower. But then they started changing the ECU units to make more horsepower. So now you've got a sheet metal tub that was designed to go, let's say it averaged 180 miles an hour and hit walls at 150. Well, now it averages 200 miles an hour and hits walls at 175 or 80. So all of a sudden, the horsepower, people don't think of this, but the horsepower, we had some engines that were just a tick under 1,000 horsepower for qualifying out of an air-cooled 2-valve nothing engine with a single turbocharger. It wasn't even a twin. So during the course, just to show you the dominance of that chassis that won in 89 in its overall position to the day that it quit racing, Porsche decided, look, we think we've got a chance in 89 to win some big races and win the championship. As it turned out, John Andretti did win the Porsche Cup, but we didn't win the championship. Why? Because we had, frankly, there were some sprint races where our tires weren't quite up to some of the Goodyear tires in the sprint races, and other times we'd run away. But we just consistently, we probably were just a teenth back. In distance races, no trouble. We had them covered. The BF Goodrich tires were every bit as competitive. But there was times when we were just a tick off. We also, frankly speaking, we ended up with a car that was purely dominant in terms of its construction. And I think, for years after we pulled it out of racing and sold it, it still would have been competitive. Because remember that we could have raced that car competitively through 90, 91, 92. The only reason we didn't is that BF Goodrich said, look, the Nissan's coming on strong. They've called us. They want to team up. I said, well, wait a minute. What does that mean for me? I mean, I have a company that I've got 35 employees here and a lot going on, and we've built this car, and it's really good. Well, sell it, and we'll get Nissans, and we'll go racing. I said, wait, let me explain something to you. We watch the Nissan operation. It's fast. They've got great drivers. The chassis are coming around. They're really good. Well, they'll give us all their stuff. I said, no, they won't. They'll give us last year's stuff. And B.F. Goodrich said, no, that's the direction we want to go. Well, remember that we did go to Nissan, and I was so discouraged, not because their stuff was no good, but because I knew that their engine reliability was hopeless. I mean, the set of cylinder heads was 3 hours. That was it. So if you're going to race longer than 3 hours, just plan on dropping out. Get early dinner reservations. So when we began to see that and have to change engines after every session like they were, but they had a huge budget and huge staff, and it meant nothing to them to come in after every practice and put an engine in.
And you did get last year's stuff, and those cars had been heavily developed for a couple years by that point on Goodyears, so it was not a plug-and-play solution for you by any means.
Right. And fortunately for me, I was so discouraged, frankly speaking, that when David Seabrook came along and wanted to buy my operation, it took 2 lawyers, 2 fax machines, and 2 days. And on Monday, I didn't know I was selling my company, and on Thursday morning, the tractor trailers left my facility under new ownership, and I came in on Friday morning and sat down at my desk in an empty shop, and they went to Lime Rock. And that was when I stopped. I just said, that's it for me, I'm done. And I was one of the lucky guys who got to sell out and bail out and retire well, and we had sold our 962s for a lot of money, so we just did really well. And it was all, I really credit that particular car, that Chapman tubbed 108 C2. Remember that 108 was a brand new car in 1985, and Pete Halsmer tangled with a back marker at the start-finish line at Daytona and went head-on into the wall and wrote the car off. That car sat in a wad in the back of our shop until 86, 87. Late 87, when we decided to resurrect it with the honeycomb tub as an experiment. And that experiment led to all the Chapman tub cars that raced in IMSA. It led to that winner in 89. It led to the dominance in 88 and even in 87. That was a tub. It saved Bob Wollek's life, tragically to be lost later to a bicycle accident. But that car was remarkable, and it's remarkable today. And that's saying something 30 years later. Show me another sports car. You take the hottest hot dog driver that's out there today after Colucci restores it and Alvin does the engine and Gunnar gets the aero back right again and fixes the body and gets 50 pounds of paint off of it. And you put some hot dog in that thing and you send them out to Daytona on a set of soft tires, and I guarantee you're going to stand up and salute.
Wow. So the other thing, Jim, that I thought was fun looking back at this 89 race, this wasn't a single entry for the team. There was a pretty cool initiative that included some other Andrettis, some other key members of Al's team, really knowing that your program had carried the baton after Al's death and his program shut down. You guys are trying to do something rather special there with the second car, the number 68962. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came together with the Andrettis?
That was a wonderful deal. And here's the reason. Al and I got along really well. I mean, we'd tear each other's guts out to win from 1975 on. And he won a lot, and I won some, and we did good. So we were very competitive, but we had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. Peter Gregg and Al Holbert and I really really, really worked well together, and we raced hard against each other. We'd knock one another out of the way, but we'd collaborate to carry our efforts forward, particularly when Al was with Porsche. He'd come and go. But yet our relationships were honest and straightforward, and I respected that. So the natural progression for Miller to finish out their contract was to stay with a Porsche because they had, and Derek, and they liked Bob, and I went and hawked the deal and went to their factory and sat with them, and we hammered out a deal. But I got a call from Chapman Root, and he said, Jim, I think I'm going to buy Al's 962, and I'd like to run it at Daytona. And I said, really? What a great idea. And he said, yeah, it's still in the Miller colors. It's the car that he finished up with. And I said, well, what can I do? And he said, do you think you could convince B.F. Goodrich to give us tires and maybe pay a couple of bills? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of strange. You're asking a guy to hand his sponsor over, you know, that usually those are fighting words in racing, you know. So I said, I don't know. It sounds kind of clever to me. And I said, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to run Mario and Michael in it. And you got John. And I said, you know what? This is a press dream. This is a dream. But now I'm going to help you kick my ass? I mean, I'm not so sure that's a great idea. And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, first of all, we can't run it. I'm topped out, man. I got about 30 guys, and that's what it takes, particularly the 24-hour. So I can't do that. He says, I've already talked to, God, here I am getting old. I've already talked to Al's guy, you know, his crew chief.
Kevin Doran.
And Kevin and the boys will come and do it. And I don't know if you've seen the picture that came up on Facebook the other day, and Bob Carlson's at one end, and all the guys are there, and it was taken in the pit lane of the 68 car. And I said, well, the only way that would work, because we've got Miller colors, the only way that would work, and I would recommend that B.F. Goodrich do it, is if they did appear to be a team. Whereas we always had number 67 and number 68 from our Europe days. So if you'd be willing to lose the 14 and put 68 on the car in the position where we have the numbers, and the only difference will be the Miller on the front of your car will be the slash and ours will be the straight. And so you stay with that, and then B.F. Goodrich will go beneath that on yours. It's already beneath that on ours. And so on. It'll have to appear the same, but we can't run it. If you can get Kevin and the boys to run it, we're good to go. And I talked to B.F. Goodrich, and they talked to them, and they put together a deal. I don't think it was a big deal. It was certainly tires and maybe a little bit of help and maybe a paycheck to the Andrettis or something like that. I just don't know, to tell you the truth. So we arrived down there. Both cars are pretty quick, but there's a tremendous amount of understeer in Al's car. And Mario comes to me and he says, this car pushes the front end so bad. I said, well, just remember, when the fuel load goes down and you overheat the rear tires with this turbocharger, it'll balance a bit. But it isn't ever going to be great, but it will balance. And it did. But I think in their attempts to get the understeer out of the car, they went to the anti-roll bars. If you've never seen one on the back end of a 962, I have. They're about 8 inches long.
Oh, yeah.
And about 1.25 inches in diameter tube with like 6-inch arms on it. There's not a lot of flexion involved here. In other words, it doesn't work. So if you disconnect it, you've got roll. If you connect it, you have nothing. Nothing moves. And so they went full stiff on that bar. And if my recollection serves me correctly, they were running up with us. We were all kind of running around up at the front, 3 or 4 different cars. And all at once they come down the pit lane with oil dripping out of the back of the car. and the tail comes off, and the rear anti-roll bar has pulled the top of the transmission off.
I wonder why it has understeer as well.
Right. And it had actually broken the top of the transmission case out, and we tried to come up with some clever idea, like we did at Le Mans one year, where we took a Fanta can and JB welded it on the side of the Lola Trans and still finished second.
Wow.
But that wasn't going to work. It was right above the ring and pinion, or the ring gear. And it cracked. It took the top of the case right out of the transmission, because that's where the anti-roll bar mounted. It was no wider than the top of the case, and the two mounting brackets were bolted straight into the trans housing, and when it decided not to move, it just finally pulled the top out of the transmission.
No, and it's a crazy amount of forces. Plus, if you think about the banking, the high speeds, and the pounding, and kind of, bobbing up and down on the right rear, I mean, that's just waiting to get yanked.
Yeah. So I'd never seen that. We'd broken bell housings before with torsional movement, but I'd never seen the top come off a transmission. and naturally they were finished. It still worked. Everything, the wheels turned, the gears moved, everything worked, but it had no anti-roll bar anymore and no top of the transmission. So, and as you know, you can change anything in your transmission or engine in IMSA rules at the time, except the case.
Yep.
You can't change it. We could have literally probably had that car in the top 5 at the end of the race by putting a transmission in it, but you can't. Just wasn't going to happen. So fortunately, they came with few spares because Chapman had only bought the car. We had transmissions and engines and everything stacked up in our transporter, so we could literally have handed them a really good transmission, and they could have changed it out right there and continued. But that's against the rules, so we didn't. But that's how that worked, and we ended up operating as completely autonomous teams. Naturally, we would like to have seen them be second to us, but not win, because we didn't want them to win. We wanted to win. And had we not won, we would have been rooting for them. So, yes, we were brothers in battle, but we didn't want them to do any better than we did, that's for sure. So looking at some of the fun related to your win in the 67 Porsche, Jim, it's always great looking back on Jonathan Ingram's race report from the 89 event and on track. And one of the things he mentioned, bit of fun, and this was also the reputation back then, that the harder BFG tires, there was one thing here where John Andretti had complained that the harder but more durable compound were hard as flint and were throwing flames off of them, and yet the team's softer night tires were a delight. Knowing that Goodyear had really become kind of the class, I should say the GTP standard, you were certainly going in there with a challenger brand in terms of tire, but just share some thoughts about how clearly just some of the great anecdotes from your drivers that, boy, when we were going for durability, you're going to have to hold on, but when you go to something a little softer and cooler conditions, that's when the car really came alive. Well, it is, but remember, they all come alive at night. I mean, it's like Sebring, where it's 3.5 seconds faster at night because nobody paid any attention to the track and configuration. I mean, going out on the straight at Sebring at night, where you could be called for leaving the course, you'd turn right to go out onto the straight. Well, as soon as it was dark, you just from the previous corner just went straight across the airfield, and everybody was 2.5 to 3 seconds a lap faster. So nighttime makes cars go faster. The air's thicker, the engines are running cooler, they make more power. Tires, you can go a little softer. I think John probably didn't have that quite as, if it's a quote, I'm not sure it was, but it might have been sort of Jonathan's impression. But we did not have a big difference in the tires. And frankly, we basically ran the same tire the entire race. We might have once or twice, maybe BF Goodrich decided to slip in a tire, but we had such a conservative race plan. Our car was so fast that we just basically said, just bring her back alive. And we reduced the revs, and we didn't push the tires. And I think it might have been more of John getting used to. Remember, John had tested briefly, but never really driven a 962. And the 962 was a big car and weighed a little bit more than what he'd been driving. And I'm not sure that that's as accurate. And I don't recall it being significant. I remember there is a difference because I drove them. Up until 91, I still did a lot of their tire testing. So I know what we went from. There was one great one where somebody mentioned to John Morton one time. We were out at Riverside testing it. We were talking to the engineers, and they were really scrambling. And we had shockingly handed them the Riverside 6-hour 1-2 finish, and they weren't ready to win. They were more surprised than anybody there. And the tire was perfect. It was my home track, so I was quick. Pete Halsmer was quick. Morton was quick. Knoop was good. And we just flat blew them away on BF Goodrich tires, which was unheard of. Well, I think they said, now what do we do? Oh, my God, how do we come back from that? I said, don't worry, you're going to get your ass kicked soon. And so the long and the short of it is that we ran an awful lot of different tires, but at Daytona, we didn't run a lot of tires. We didn't make quick tires part of our game. And I'm not sure that we had that big a difference with them. But I do remember one time Morton says to the engineers, hey, doesn't the SR-71 have silver tires? And they said, yeah, the heat on breaking the sound barrier and landing and all that stuff is really hard on the tires, so there's a certain aluminum content in the tire. So jokingly, Morton says, well, that's probably what we need. And they made silver tires, and they turned up at a test at Riverside, and I said, this is going to be really embarrassing when you leave the pits and lay down big silver stripes all the way down the pit lane. And we ran them for about 10 laps and said, well, no danger of that. They're junk.
Wow.
Just take them away. That's not going to happen. So we never ran. They were copies of the SR-71 tire. So we had some interesting stuff. Oh, and Jochen Mass one time. Oh, my God. Jochen Mass and I were a hell of a good combination. We flew when the tires were right. We should have won at the Glen. We finished second. But we were a good driving combination. We were quick, and our cars were quick. And we were in the 67 car, which I usually set up the way I liked it. And it was usually the quicker car. And so Mass comes in on this. They put on a set of tires, and this is during practice. And he comes back in and he said, I smell wood burning. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, these tires are so hard, they must be made out of wood. And I said, oh, shit. Don't say that very loud. Somebody's going to hear it. And he says, no, I'm telling you, Jim, they're just awful. So I got in the car and went out, and I made a couple of laps, and I could not get them up to temperature. You just couldn't do it. And I came back in, and I said, he's right. They feel like they're wooden tires. And the engineers were heartbroken, and the PR guys are running around in circles. And so they said, well, all we got is those ones we brought to try to qualify and maybe use at the end of the race if we need to run after somebody. I said, drag them out. That's what we're going to have to race on, because that was it. And I said, how many sets you got? Well, probably got enough to get one car to the end, but we'll never get both cars to the end. I said, good, put the hard ones on Halsmer's car. He was so pissed. We lapped him about, I don't know, we must have lapped him about an hour into the race. It was a 6-hour race. And and we lapped him, and he was so pissed. I would have been pissed too, but it was just, he's not the boss. I was the boss, and Mass and I were quicker at the time. And
I was going to say it's boss's prerogative, man. I mean, you're writing the checks, brother.
Right. So anyway, that was the only time that I really remember we had a significant difference in the tires from their, call it an intermediate compound to a soft compound. Because the hard compounds we gave up on really early. And Daytona was a really interesting racetrack. Those tires cooled off on the banking. Daytona wasn't particularly hard on the tires. I don't remember blowing a tire there other than a Goodyear in a 935, but that was before the bus stop, and we'd go smoking in there at 215 miles an hour into 3, and poor on Gaius couldn't lift. It was just not in his DNA. And he just blew the right rear tire right off of Ted Field's 935 and went sailing down into the infield and back up to the wall. And they built the bus stop chicane after that. So that was the only time I ever remember anybody other than from a puncture. That's different. But, wearing out a tire, going down to the cord and eventually have it fail or a sidewall go, Daytona was not the place that happened, at least not to us. So maybe to a stock car for sure, but not to the sports cars.
Let's close on this, Jim. So we're looking back 30 years on this awesome win, definitely one that, the odds makers beforehand probably would have put Jaguar up there, coming off their 88 win at least. The Electromotive team with the Nissan was certainly, I know reliability was a question, but if we're just talking coming out of 88, that might have been the easy direction for folks to pick. Obviously, you had different plans. I love looking at things from your win, like qualifying you mentioned. You guys qualified 12th. You were, almost 4 seconds off of the pole set by Jeff Brabham in the Nissan. Just numerically, it's clear that there's some real hot rods in the field. That doesn't mean that you had the turtle in the race and ended up winning because it was a turtle, but you just share some thoughts on the fact that you had Jaguars, you had Nissans, Toyota was making its debut, lots of other competition there, but that's a Porsche 962 in victory lane, finished third, finished fourth. The old girl not only delivered, but the one with, I would say, the most amount of development came out on top for sure.
Yeah, and remember that we knew that we were the fastest car in 88. And that was the same car back with about another second built into it. So we knew where we stood. We had no intentions whatsoever of trying to out-qualify those guys. We knew they had qualifying motors. We knew they'd change motors after the qualifying sessions in practice. They'd already changed motors after the first day. We watched them, and they ran a lot of horsepower and a lot of downforce. We trimmed our car out. And we set it on a race pace, and that's all we tuned to the whole time. We had so much confidence with that car coming out of 88, knowing that we'd also trimmed it out and had more downforce with less drag. We knew that this car was the one. And we just simply ran our own deal. And if you watch how the race went, right away we started moving up, but it was a high-speed cruise. And we cruised our way to the front and cruised our way to the victory. The only time that we ran that car as hard as the other guys was when we left Bob in with, I think it was only 40 minutes to go.
Yeah, it was him and John Nielsen, I believe, from
Yes.
in the XJR9 Jaguar.
And we were set for a driver change, and I said, no, put the boost back up again. We hadn't touched the boost knob the entire time. I said, kick it up, half a point, 0.5, run it up 0.5, and let Bob go. And we did not fill the tank. It was a splash and go. And remember that the handling changed fairly significantly with a full to empty tank. With the intercooler high on that car, it rolled. You know, that car was quicker with the side intercoolers, but it didn't have the throttle response. So, and we couldn't run high boost consistently with the side intercoolers. We'd overheat them. With the top intercooler, we could run more boost and make less heat. So all we did is kick the boost up maybe 0.5 of a point and said, Bob, go get him. And he started laying down qualifying laps. And they didn't catch us. Even with a pit stop, they didn't catch us. So we were so confident in the speed of that car, and we arrived there confident. So I don't think we paid too much attention to them, frankly. I don't remember saying to myself, oh, boy, what are we going to do about these guys? First of all, we knew the Toyota was new. Secondly, we knew that in 3 hours the cylinder heads would fall off the Nissan, so they'd beat history. And so those weren't even a consideration. The Jaguar was a consideration. But I kept watching them and thinking, they're driving the wheels off those things. They got 2 off in the dirt in the infield. They're drafting everybody in town. We didn't do any of that. High speed cruise. And that's what that beauty was made for. But when the time came at the end of the race, there was no question in anybody's mind who was the fastest car. The Jaguar did not catch us. With every imaginable thing they could do, they couldn't get us. So
I read that Tom Walkinshaw came running down pit lane to congratulate you on the win, which Tom's reputation as being a somewhat prickly character. I liked reading that little passage in Jonathan's race report because that told me that Tom respected how you won the race.
Tom was, as you say, a prickly personality. There's no doubt about that. There's plenty of people that would say they don't like him or didn't like him and never did. I'm not one of those guys. I respected him. He ran a hot dog racing team. He took over the Jaguar effort and turned it into a winner. So you had to respect him. But I never thought that they would be at the end of the race our competitor. I did not count on that. I counted on another Porsche. I kept thinking, now, who's going to get up there with us? Is it going to be Dyson? Who's it going to be? I never even thought of them. And then here we come to the end of the race, and I'm thinking, damn, Walkinshaw's got this thing figured out. And they're coming. And so that's when we turned it up and then stayed ahead of them. But he did. And he was very, very gracious. And he said, and all he said was, congratulations, that was a hell of a race after 24 hours. And it was. I think it might have been one of the closest finishes ever up to that point anyway.
Yeah, it was I think he had about a minute and a half. If reading through the report, Bob pulled out with about 23 seconds on Nielsen, and then extended that out to a minute. And I also read that they were having to manage, I think, some high oil temperatures as well.
Yes.
But as where they were playing the rabbit early in the race, and at stages during the race, being able to play the rabbit in return certainly didn't hurt.
That's right. And remember that we had saved everything, and we never played the rabbit. We never tried to take the lead unless it was easy. We never tried to get tricky with pit stops and driver exchanges or anything. We simply knew that the car, if it finished the race, would win the race. That we were that confident.
I'm looking at a picture right here, Jim, of the team in victory lane. John Andretti with a big old smile holding up, I don't know if it's a 40-ounce of Miller beer. It's a big beer. It's not a regular little 12-ouncer, but holding up a big beer. Derek is just that classic smile of his.
Right.
Bob Wollek, another, Bob wasn't a big, smiley, boisterous guy, but his version of a beaming smile is there to be seen. And also, Miss Camel GT is there holding an oversized check for $20,000.
Yeah, can you believe it? Can you believe it? I mean, what a joke. But it was always a joke. But remember this. You have to put this all in perspective. I ran my racing teams as a business, and I always got sponsorship, and if I didn't, I stopped racing. You might notice in my early career there were seasons where I'd stop. I ran out of money. And so I didn't have enough sponsorship. So I'd be competitive and then have to say, okay, never mind, we're going to have to skip here and skip there. I just didn't have the options. So 20 grand coming back into my business operation, which paid out to drivers and crew more than anything else, was a significant amount of money, because remember that we were 100% funded.
Sure.
So if you say, well, it's silly prize money, it's true. But at the time, it was better than the 10 grand you would have won 5 years before that.
True.
And most of the teams that won it before that weren't fully funded. They were private operations, even the Kramer cars and the Gare Gloss and all the guys that ran cars there, they weren't fully funded. Well, we had to be fully funded. We couldn't do it. And so we had BF Goodrich, and we had escort radar warning, and I don't know, you could look at the cars over the years, and somebody once told me that I got out of my car and I looked like a corner worker. I had so many patches on my suit. I said, well, let's see, that one was $12 and this one's $100 and so on and so forth. And when I won at Sears Point in 76, it was really funny. Bob Bondurant came running up to me. I was on the pole. No, maybe a second. Maybe Gray was on the pole. I don't remember. Anyway, and he comes running up to me and says, Buzz, I've been watching you. I think you got this. And I said, good. He says, if I gave you $300, would you put stickers on the front fenders of your car that say Bondurant Driving School? I said, sure. I'll do anything. That son of a bitch never paid me. I won the race.
Bob, what are you doing, buddy? You know what you should do? Yeah, you need to send over an invoice, but you need to make sure it's on aged paper that looks like it was sent in 76.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, Lord. Oh, that is brilliant.
But it always came down with me. You know, it was I would have raced for nothing if I could have. If I could have funded every season, every year, I'd have just done it because I loved it so much. But it was terribly important to me to earn money racing to prove that we should be there, or I should be there.
No, fair enough.
And it was the way of validating that I was worth it, or my team was worth it. And so even after I quit driving, I said, no, this isn't some rich guy's operation. We won't make it. But if we can generate the funds, which I devoted a lot of time to, then it would validate that we were a contender and we should be there, and we were. And 89 was the culmination of all of that. And I have no doubt that had we continued with that car into about 92, we still would have been winning Daytona 24-hour races and Sebring and the longer races. Maybe not the sprinters. We were beginning to give up some on the sprint tracks. We were dead even at Palm Beach, which I expected we'd be a little bit ahead, but we were dead even. And I think we should have won the race. I don't know. We were just off just a tease with one of our drivers. But anyway, I think we would have competed for major victories at Elkhart Lake and Watkins Glen and Daytona and Sebring, where you get the high-speed runs on the straights and maybe not quite as much cornering ability. But I think we would have been competitive with that car as it was up through 92, I'd say.
Let's close on this, Jim. 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel like it's been 30 years?
No, it doesn't. I keep getting invited to Porsche Rennsports, and we all keep losing more hair and getting fatter, and we all laugh and tell stories and everything. But when that car shows up at one of those things where people talk about the incredible Porsches that have come down the pike before and after that car is right at the top of the list. And so it's really, really, it really pumps me up to have people remember it and think about it the way it was. And ironically, it was in a similar livery to what the 14 looked like when Al had it. And yet, And Al was enormously successful. And yet, put them side by side, and the 67 Busby Racing version of the 962 is the most memorable to most people, believe it or not. It's just as a car. And it is, when it turns up at any event, it draws a crowd, even today.
And here's our interview with Brother John Andretti.
Well, what happened is when we got to Daytona, I was hired in to run for the points. So I was the only driver of the 5 that were at Daytona for the 2 cars that were going to be driving for Jim at all the races. And so Derek was going to do the endurance races, and then Mike and Mario were brought in to do that race to provide a backup car scenario, so that if something happened to the primary car or whatever, that one was number 67, and one was 68.
Yeah.
And what they did is I was the third guy in either car. When it got down to the third guy to go in, it was decided that I would go into the 67 with Bob and Derek. That it probably had the best opportunity to win, and had, it had the most. It was a little bit different car. It had a little bit more downforce and had a lot of different things, and so it just had more work done. And Mike and Mario had a little bit of some issues with their car, so they decided that I'd go in that car. And fortunately through the night, I was driving when. Do you remember when all the fog laid in? I thought it was just campfires.
That was going to be my next question. We were also fondly recall it as the Fog Bank 24, where there was a good 3 or 4 hours where the whole party shut down. What was that like? It didn't happen in an instant, but obviously it had to start creeping in.
Well, I thought it was basically campfires and, the smoke from them. And Mike Colucci, he called me on the radio and he said, can you see? And I said, I don't know, tell me if I can. He said, I don't think you can. And I said, okay, then I can't. And so, because they were asking people if they could keep running. And so I was the last guy out of the car. And then, again, back in the third guy. So, I got essentially a whole night's worth of sleep. I probably got 5 hours of sleep, which in 24 hours
never happens. Yeah.
Yeah, now they have 4 guys and stuff like that, so you get closer to it. But it's, with double and triple stints and things like that. But at that day, it wasn't, it wasn't like that. We ran, people talk about today, it's like qualifying the whole race. We ran as hard as we could the entire race, because we had to run hard enough to try to break the Nissan, and which usually wasn't too hard, because they would jump out there and break themselves. But the Jag was a real hard one, because they were solid, and that was sort of the other team, the Porsches and the Jags, and with the Tom Hawkinshaw Jaguars, they were tough. But they what was interesting is we got towards the end of the race, and I was running, and the Jaguar had a front radiator on it.
Yeah.
And I was leading, and the Jaguar was running second, and we were running together the whole time. And every time he got close to me, I would just drop my wheels into the dirt and kick the stuff up into the radiator. And eventually they had to stop because they started overheating.
Yeah. See, it's stuff like this where it might sound evil, but it's just honest, man. And you weren't the person who invented this idea. It's been going on forever. But I just love the truthful bits like this, John, where you go, yeah, we're trying to win, and we'll win however we can. I'll just throw in quickly, when I was a young open wheel mechanic, at certain races that were very important, we would be told, or it would be suggested, that we might overfill the oil reservoir. Why? Well, the overflow bottle was at the very back of the car. And we would also be told, and you would unscrew, it was basically just a regular bottle, plastic bottle turned upside down. the oil overflow fed in from the top, right behind the gearbox, and there was a cap on it that you would unscrew at the bottom, and it would just pour straight out. Well, we'd be told, hey, you put an extra 2 quarts of oil in, and also unwind that cap just a little bit. And lo and behold, a couple laps into the race, cap would fall off, and boss or driver would be leading and or close to the lead and just pissing oil out of the back, making things difficult on the person behind. So whether it's that or dipping wheels and clogging up radiators, the art of war is a complex thing, man.
Well, it's not like I crashed them or anything. I just took advantage of something that the Porsche, you could do that with, with no problem because the radiators were up on the side pods, and so you weren't going to clog them up, and, the Jag had it out front, so, hey, everything's free game I look at, and, I remember running my uncle hard for second in my rookie season at Milwaukee, and he was dropping wheels in the dirt of Milwaukee, of all places. So, to throw stones back at me. So, it's whatever it takes. I don't agree with crashing people to win, but I do agree with, doing everything within your power to do it, and that was something that was, in our power to do. And so and then Bob jumped in, and he finished the race. He just did a double stint right at the end and finished the race. He did a great job. He was the quickest in the car for sure at that point. Later in the season, I was able to get quicker, but that was my first time ever in a 960. Well, only my second time ever in a 962. So, we didn't have a lot of practice. There wasn't the roar. We didn't do any testing. So, when I showed up to Daytona 24, and I went into my first stint, that was the first time I probably put an hour straight in the car.
Wow. No pressure. Tell me if you can, John, just remembering this unique 2-car team you mentioned here in the outset. So the 67 entry, the winning car, that was the full season primary Busby entry. The 68 was put together really also in tribute to the late Al Holbert with, the Holbert Racing crew helping to put that chassis, on the grid and such, obviously with Michael, Mario, and yourself. What were your general thoughts coming in, knowing that, you were there to be the all-rounder, right? You didn't necessarily have a home. You had both cars that were yours to drive. What was the mindset, knowing, as you said, one car is full season, but you also have the other one to tend to, and it happens to be family?
Yeah, well, the thing I wonder is, how in the hell is somebody going to do this race on 2 people? And, I'm looking at it saying, there should have been like a 6th guy there to go in the opposite car that I went into, but that was not here or there. Their car they ended up breaking, but Chapman Root actually ended up buying that car to put that together. Yeah. That was not a Jim Busby owned car, and so I think that all the things that went into it. The whole 962 and all the things that were going on. To me, it was really important that I just go out there and just put together a solid race, and just, not do anything to not get in trouble, but put in lap times that weren't gonna hurt us, that would help, that would at least keep us even, if not help some. So, that was my only objective. I didn't, but it was a full pace race. They talk about, I guess, they act like today is so different than back then. I'm going to tell you it wasn't. We finished on the same lap as the Jag. And so, you're talking about you ran as hard as you could run the whole time, and yet we still finished on the same lap too. So, it was not like, back then you just cruised, and if you didn't break, you won. No, it wasn't anything like that either then. So, I get a little bit insulted by the folks today when they talk about how much more competitive it is and all that. It's still 24-hour race. You still got to stay out of trouble. You still have 3, multi-classes that you have amateur drivers with professional drivers. You're dealing with all the same things. and the weather. It's Daytona, you know, and I mean, it could be hot as hell or it could be cold. You know, you don't even know. It could rain, it could not rain. You know, I mean, it's there's so many things that play into that race. So I think that, you know, looking back, I mean, we ran no different than they do today. And the thing I like about back then, though, is when I walked down Daytona, I walked around the roar a little bit with my son, and we just wanted to see what's going on a little bit. And you know, all the chassis are pretty similar, you know, if not the same. And there's some unique ones like the Mazda and stuff, but there's, for the majority of them, back when I ran the 962, I mean, that was the majority of cars, but you know, you had the Nissans, you had the Jags, you had Ford, you had all of them. They were, and each had a different idea of how to put together the program. It was almost like Formula One. And I thought that was really cool because, you know, the difference in the engines and all the things that were going on. It was, you know, you had the V12 normally aspirated against the Porsche 962, you know, the turbo, and, you know, it just, I thought it was a really cool era, you know, to get to race in.
So this as well, John, by no means were you new to IMSA and GTP. I mean, you had some great runs in the past, BMW part of that as well. But if we're talking about major achievements, I mean, winning the 24 Hours of Daytona here to kick off the 89 season, I'm guessing at least in sports cars that definitely stands out as a rather high achievement for you. We also look back as well, you know, in hindsight, we know it would be Derek Bell's final big 24-hour win in his illustrious career. It was also Porsche's 50th win in IMSA with the 962. I mean, there's a lot of big items that took place when you guys rolled into victory lane.
Yeah, sometimes you're better off not knowing anything, and you just come in and try to do a good job, and because then, you know, you're not playing to what ifs. You're playing to, you know, afterwards I found out, you know, Porsche did the big poster with the 50 wins, and I thought that was really cool, and, you know, that we were a part of that. And, you know, we actually won later that year, Bob and I did.
Yep.
And, you know, so, I mean, there was a lot of fun things that came out of that. As a matter of fact, the next morning, because of the win at Daytona, I got a call from Vince Granatelli, wanted me to run at Indianapolis one. You know, so because of the Daytona win, it spurred me getting another ride at Indy, and
wow.
You know, following up on my '87 rookie season. So it was, you know, it was really, my '88 rookie season in IndyCar. You know, I ran full time, well, mostly full time until I got hurt. But then, you know, so it was really kind of fun for me. I got to be sure that I was going to go back to Indianapolis and all that. So it created opportunity. Also, I won the Porsche North American Cup, which was hard not to win.
It's a big deal.
If you were running 962 full time and doing well, but that gave me helped me with the trip to Le Mans with Mike and Mario, which was, you know, really another great experience. You know, obviously, I mean, 24 Hours of Daytona is a huge win, and Tom Blattler, who you know, he was a Miller rep at the time, and he got the steering wheel taken out of the car, and he actually had to mount it for me. So I had the steering wheel from the car that won the 24 Hours of Daytona.
Oh, wow. How cool is that?
That, to me, is more important than the trophy.
What I love about that, John, is, as you mentioned, you go into the event with no expectation, not sure what's ahead, just trying to focus on things. And then you find out, as you mentioned, next day you get a phone call, a door reopens an IndyCar, and just, you know, so many other positive things that came from this. It's pretty awesome to realize. I guess the last question for you, John, is what comes to mind on this 30th anniversary? Whenever I do podcasts or written pieces on this, you know, most people say, geez, you know, it feels like it was yesterday. Does it feel like that, or does it feel like, yeah, I put in 30 years since then?
Well, it's funny, until you mentioned it was the 30th anniversary, I didn't even know it was. You know, so it is not something that sort of at the forefront of my mind to anniversaries. But, what's really cool is Mario's, he's gotten the 50th anniversary at Indianapolis this year, and 30th year at Daytona for us. I mean, anything that is family related is obviously, means so much more. And to me, does it seem like it happened? To me, every race just happened yesterday, because I can remember races like they did just happen yesterday. I mean, I don't know if I think that's your level of concentration so high when you drive that you that stuff is just burned in your memory. And for me, it was so many things. And it was really, I was the sort of the new guy on the block. I mean, I knew nobody on the team. I didn't know the car owner. I really didn't know anybody that well. And yet, Colucci, he treats everybody really good. And so he put his arm around me, and Derek Bell was really good to me. Bob is Bob, but Derek said, you just go out there and do the best you can, and we'll see where we end up, and he, so he was real supportive, and I think that all those things really helped, to put together a race, and plus, when you're going in as the guy that's everybody has to be, which we weren't, I think that often it's hard to live up to that expectation, because it's like everything goes wrong that day. And even though you have a fast car, that's only one part of it. We just were solid, all night, all day, and we got a 4-hour nap, and all worked out for us. I mean, really, really lucky to be a part of it.
Brother, thank you for spending your time, sharing your time, and as you know, you've got a lot of fans, not just of your career, but of you as a human being, and the fight you're in not only inspired people, but you're helping other folks to make sure they're doing their best to be healthy as well. So I do love the fact that we can just take a few minutes out of your day to talk about racing and not have to focus on anything else. So thank you, brother.
Yeah, that's the thing I love the most, so other than my family.
And here is the great Alvin Springer from Andial and Porsche.
Looking at the front of that beautiful number 67 car in the gold and white Miller colors, plus that equally gorgeous Andial sticker at the very front of the nose that you might know a little bit about. A wonderful time. That race, I mean, how's this? It's 2019, so we're celebrating the 50th year of IMSA. This victory in 1989 represented the 50th win for the Porsche 962. I'm guessing just in a general sense, someone who spent so many years of his life with Porsche and this glorious prototype, you have some pretty fond memories of this victory.
I definitely have, but it wasn't, and that I always want to stress, it isn't only the victory. It was during the 80s, the IMSA days with the 962s. It was the teams, the drivers, the owners. It was a pleasure to be around, to be forced, to produce the best. And I like to do that, from the Andial side and from my personal side. But at the same token, without the support and the effort of the other people, we could have never achieved that. So therefore, when we say the 1989 winning the 24 Hours of Daytona, that was excellent, enjoyed it, especially, like for me, it was a tribute to Al, because he passed not away that long ago in 1988. But at the same token, we had Broome in third place and Bayside in fourth place. So it was just, how can I say, like a nice closing of the 962 era at the end of 1980s.
And this is something that, for those who weren't there or have come to follow sports car racing after this event, there had already been a changing of the guard, you could say. Nissan, right, just kicked everybody's behind in 1988. won almost all the races. Jaguar won the 24 Hours of Daytona in 1988. It was shaping up to be a resumption of that Jaguar versus Nissan fight. And don't get me wrong, there are other players, but the 962, a bit of an older girl by that point, wasn't the freshest car in the field. Is there any part of you, Alvin, that still appreciates the fact that while the 962s might not have been the cars everyone was predicting would be going out and winning Daytona in '89, yeah, there's a nice little surprise in there, too.
Yeah, of course. It was, again, it was more than gratifying. Believe me, during the race, Dieter and the guys from Andial, believe me, we had our moments of silence when not only for the 4-hour delay with the fog. All I'm saying is from the nerve-wracking sense, but it's normal doing a 24-hour race that, sometimes you go, would it be nicer if we had one of the newer cars, or if the 962 improved something? But the car, like I said before, was coming to its end. And under the circumstances, to pull off that 1, 3, and 4 position was more than gratifying. And I don't know. I'm sure that you were aware that Al was working on an open cockpit car with an 8-cylinder engine from Porsche that converted the Indy engine. I don't know if you know about it,
yes.
But I just want to mention it very briefly. We were already on the next step for 962, but then unfortunately his death, stopped the whole program and the whole project. So it was, again, I want to say that it was gratifying for us, gratifying for the teams, definitely for Busby and the Miller team. At the same token, it was a tribute to Al from my side, or at least from all of us.
Another interesting point looking at the cars in the field for the 89 race, Alvin, is we had, a high-profile entry for Mario Andretti and Michael Andretti in a 962. We had, Rob Dyson, Bruce Levin, and the Bayside entry there. We had another one with Frank Jelinski and, John Luis Ricci and a few others. You start moving a little bit closer. We've got the Hotchkiss team with that family there and the beautiful Winds colors. But you just keep moving up. And there's, another one with Bernard Jourdain. Then you get towards the podium here. We've got Klaus Ludwig, James Weaver, Cyril Vandermerve, Walter Brunn, Hans Stuck, Larari. Even if the 962 wasn't the newest car among prototypes, among the GTPs, you just tell us a little bit about, if you're talking about a 24-hour race, clearly a lot of folks realized that having a 962 still offered very good odds of victory.
Yeah, definitely it was. Because, don't forget, the Jaguars they were already, kind of proven. But the Nissan, and again, I want to mention the Toyota. The Toyota at the time, during the race, it didn't show much. But it was already, the writing was on the wall, definitely for the Nissan. So I knew that 1990 would be a very difficult year, and it proved that way. But, at the same token, for a 24-hour race, the 962 was a proven entity, and people had the equipment. We improved, over the years a lot on the engine side, electronic side. So we felt pretty good. Did we feel confident that we would win the race? No, definitely not. But did we say, somebody else will win the race? We wouldn't do that either. When we come to Daytona, we went for the win. And that we had, and I think we had the car to do it. And the majority of the participants with 962s proved that they felt the same way.
Alvin, can you give us some insights about how but whether it was on the Andial side or even what we know today as Porsche Motorsports North America, how you and the Porsche side interacted with the teams you supported at this event? And I ask because if you look in second place, Jaguar XJR9, that's a full factory effort. If we look in fifth, again, finishing results, full factory Mazda, factory Nissans. There were pure factory teams. Porsche wasn't there with the factory effort. Can you tell me about how you helped support the teams, but obviously weren't running them on Porsche's behalf?
Yeah, what we did, and actually if you look today, beside the GTLM, the GTE class, we kind of never went into the serious with a really serious factory effort. We didn't do that at that time. We would come maybe for one race, and then done that in Daytona before. But for a complete series, we left that up to the teams. And of course, until the '88, Al Holbert was the excellent ambassador, the excellent driver, the consultant or the leader of Porsche Motorsport North America, and his team were the point. Especially with Derek Bell on his side, the two were the leading part for Porsche in Germany. And what we did with Andial, we had an agreement. When you look at it, you can say, how come that Andial supplied all the engines for the teams, and yet, only one team can win? And Holbert was the chosen team, but when you go back and you look at it, Holbert didn't win every race. So how did we do that? How did we keep the team satisfied, and how did we look at the equality? So what we had an agreement with Holbert and the teams, that we would do the development with him. And sometimes, I tell you that, sometimes it worked. Sometimes in Sebring, we blew up the turbo during the race. So that was a development turbo. Yeah, but at the same token, and I want to emphasize that a little bit and go a little bit more into details. So let's take the turbos. Okay, so we were looking at a better turbo, but how many you order right away? Because we had between 5 and 10 cars. So you order right away 20, or you order only 2, see how it works, and then, after that, you order more and give it to the teams. And our given thing was very clear. We would run one race, or practice, or qualifying, or whatever we want to do with parts, and the chassis side was the same deal. And when it was proven that we had it, but not longer than maybe one race, maybe 2 races, but not more, the teams would be offered the same stuff, same improvements, same A-pumps, whatever you want to have. And therefore, the teams never felt, I'm second-class citizen and blah, blah, blah. It didn't. We had it very good. And if you ask today the Geissens and ask them, who's still around, they will definitely second that. And I'm very proud of that. It wasn't easy.
Another thing that comes to mind, which I know, again, you and Al Holbert were like brothers. You mentioned the sorrow of his loss just in September of '88, just a matter of months before this race. There was a tribute lap turned by his father, Bob, in one of the Holbert 962s. And again, if we're talking about, I don't know if I want to say passing the baton, but those Miller colors, right? The Miller sponsorship, that's something that ended up moving over to Jim Busby's team. Was there any, I don't know if I want to say sense of pride or appreciation that although your dear friend Al and his team was not able, to win the race, obviously, with his absence, we were able to get a 962 into victory lane in colors that didn't look too dissimilar from what the Holbert team used to carry. Just wonder if there was any feeling of okay, this is the right way to start the year in tribute to Al.
Yeah. To be honest with you, it's clear after all these years. It's like the Lone car was the color, when you woke up and when you looked at it, or when you went home and you worked on a dyno, what did you see? You saw the Lone Ball, seeing the whole thing, and then all of a sudden, because of the circumstances, and I have to say also the gracefulness of Miller, they let us continue, and Jim Busby definitely and his team. There was a new color scheme or a new setup in town. And, while, I appreciated the whole circumstances, But, more than once, I was closing my eyes and I was seeing like the lone ball car running around. That's for sure. I would be lying if I would say it differently.
I still see it today when I close my eyes.
Yep,
so
me too, believe me.
Looking back 30 years on this beautiful victory, the 50th win for the 962, you were there for a lot of those years, my friend. I mean, IMSA hasn't done much.
I'll tell you, they were my best years, and I've said that before. They laid the foundation for my later involvement as President Porsche Motorsport. There's no doubt about it. So for me, it was, I was, like what I said in the beginning of the thing, to be around the teams. It was a big family, even if we competed against each other all the time, but it was not like, animosities or what. It was hard competition. But at the same time, it was a pleasure to arrive on Thursday at the racetrack and leave on Sunday. Regardless of winning and not winning and having problems and blowing up, that was part of the deal too. That wasn't happy. And it wasn't nice times, but reality is reality. But what I want to mention too is, we said 50 victories in the 962 in 5.5 years, or 4.9 years. We have a poster like that. I believe we did 49 of the victories there was in our engines. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good record. Yeah, we dominated that time. And coming back, like you asked me what the relationship with Porsche was, or what was Porsche's involvement, they were not officially involved, but my connections with Weiser already at that time were very helpful. And behind the scenes, the guys really helped us from over there. I can see that with good conscience.
And we'll close with the amazing crew chief, Mike Colucci.
You had this pretty awesome lineup, too, between the two entries, kind of the full-bore, regular, call it Busby, number 67, plus the unique running of the 68 with the Andrettis and, the former Holbert Racing team crew members and such. What do you remember from this event in general, coming in, and how it may have been a little bit different than a normal Busby production?
The thing that sticks in my mind the most is the problems that we had all through practice and qualifying with the car. And I can't remember exactly why, but we elected not to come to the pre-practice, as it was called before the roar, because we figured we had a really good car in 88 and didn't really need to go there in 89. But I don't remember exactly why. Anyway, when we got there with the car in 89, Wollek immediately complained about the engine having a high-speed, high RPM vibration. So we couldn't diagnose it right away, so we wound up changing the engine, missing a practice session, and then the problem was still there when we changed the engine. So we started chasing things in the chassis until we finally figured out that it was something related to the turbocharger. I think we only had like 13 or 15 laps of practice in qualifying when the race started.
That's confidence inspiring, my friend, right? As a crew chief, who needs more than 15 laps ahead of a 24-hour race?
Really, I mean, we changed just about everything that we possibly could in relation to the engine, and finally I talked it over with Jim, and we decided, well, we'd just take one last desperate chance, and we went down to the Porsche truck, and I got a brand new turbocharger off the truck, and we put it on just before the warm-up, and on the second lap of the warm-up, Wollek came on the radio and said the car was behaving normally, so that was a huge relief, but, I mean, we were still way behind the 8-ball.
So you had this interesting driver lineup as well with the great Bob Wollek, the great Derek Bell. You had Michael and Mario Andretti in the other car, and you had John Andretti, who I think played a role somewhat equivalent to almost a floater of someone who could, if needed, participate in both entries. Obviously, he was one of the winning trio in the Busby 67 car, but How do you remember, or how do you recall this driver lineup working together, and whether John ended up being a utility player or not?
As far as I remember, John was pretty much 100% dedicated to what we were doing in the '67 car. I mean, because he was slated to drive all year with Bob, and this was his first real race with the Porsche, and he was kind of intimidated by the car, intimidated by the lineup, and it seemed to me that Mario and Michael really, I don't know whether they were enthusiastic about him driving, but I don't remember ever really having a conversation about him going either back and forth or staying with us. It was just assumed he was going to drive with us, and that's the way I scheduled it.
Can you share some thoughts, Mike, about the 1988, 89-ish era in GTP, and just share for those who weren't there, maybe those who weren't born yet or have learned about sports car racing after the great GTP era. What was the paddock like in 1989? What were your rivals like in terms of quality, maybe even disparity in some of the differences between their cars, philosophies, and such? I mean, this was I was around then, and I've never fallen out of love with this era. But '89 at Daytona, can you just share some thoughts about who you were going up against, what they were like, and just the feeling and tone of the paddock?
Well, I mean, obviously there were a lot of 962s there, and the Jaguars were there, the Nissan was there, and Dan Gurney's Toyotas were just coming on the scene. In racing in those days was quite a lot different than it is now. I mean, you walk through the garages at Daytona now, and all the cars are homologated by manufacturers, and you really can't replace any parts. The guys don't really have much leeway to do anything. And back in the GTP days, I mean, when you got a car from Porsche, the 962, you basically had a lot of freedom to do whatever you wanted with the car. I mean, if you looked at all the different 962s, no two were the same. Everybody had their own idea of what kind of modifications they should make to the car to make them better. So that immediately jumps out of me. There's a lot more innovation in the old days and a lot more variety in the cars, even though the cars were remarkably similar. They had the same engine, transmission, and suspension bits, but and even some of the teams changed the suspension stuff, so which you can't do today. But it was great. The racing was terrific. Everybody was. It seemed like it was a lot more friendlier atmosphere, competitive, but not so cutthroat.
What about, Mike, from a standpoint of the style of racing that took place during this 1989 win of yours? In speaking with Jim Busby, he said, we knew we had a great car, a truly great car. We were cruising at points. We weren't, feeling like we had to run qualifying laps the entire race. Speak with John Andretti, though, and he saw things in a different way and said, hey, I don't like how today things are often characterized at, decade, 20 years ago, 30 years ago at the Rolex 24, it was a reliability run, and we were stroking it a bit. He said, we were driving our behinds off the entire time. What do you recall?
Yeah, that's what I recall, too. The Nissans had us pretty much covered. I mean, we had, like I said, we had bad qualifying. We started, I think, 13th. And those guys just took off and left everybody for dead. And really, they had a fairly substantial lead. I recall 1 or 2 laps at least until the race got stopped because of the fog.
Yeah.
And then immediately after that, those guys didn't last very long, and they fell by the wayside. And then was down to between us and the Jaguar. And it pretty much went back and forth. And, I can understand why that was John's impression, because he was new to the car and new to that kind of racing. And he worked hard at it. And when John was driving, the windshield blew out, too. I don't know if he mentioned that.
No, he didn't.
And it happened in a really unusual place, too. He was braking to go into the horse show, and then he came on the radio and said, the windshield just fell out. That was pretty incredible.
I swear we bolted it down, but we'll double check. Good Lord, yeah, that's maybe not the most common replacement item at a pit stop for sure.
No, well, we had used a plastic windshield all through practice, and had intended to put a glass one in for the race, because it had heating element built into it. So, and it was also more durable with a wiper in case of rain. So apparently we didn't get the glue set right, and it left. Luckily, we had the plastic one pretty close by in the garage, and when he came on the radio and said the windshield blew out, I sent one of the guys up to the truck to get it, and just by the time John got back around there, he was there with the windshield. I think we only lost about a minute. We put it in with cam locks and sent him on his way, and we finished the race with the plastic one.
I was
really lucky.
I love stories like that. The other thing that stands out too, Mike, in this, I'm sure that I know that there were little things here or there, but at least back in this era, while folks were pushing hard, the reliability was not always there. It was not uncommon for, hey, we broke third gear, hey, this thing snapped, or whatever, we ran into something, or whatever. Fuel injector failed. What do you recall from a keeping the thing alive standpoint? And I ask because, at least from my recollection, you guys were on track for the vast majority of this event, which is also fairly unique, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things were way different in the older days. I mean, the cars were a heck of a lot less reliable. The electronic controls were in their infancy, and the guys had to shift by hand. 962 was, synchro mesh gearbox, so you could screw up shifting. The modern cars are, and also the way the races are run. In the old days, there were not so many yellows, so they had a tendency to run for 3 or 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 hours without a yellow. And I think that plays into a lot in the driver fatigue. It gives it, with the yellows, it gives the drivers a chance to relax. There aren't quite so many errors. Also, it was pretty dark in the infield, and before the lighting was there. So, there was a lot. And it seemed also that in the lower classes, there were a lot less accomplished drivers. The amateurs were truly amateurs, and there were a lot more driving mistakes and a lot slower cars. And there was a huge difference between, a Porsche RSR and a 962. So the closing speeds were a lot greater, it seemed like, in the old days. The racing now is, it's a lot more competitive because the yellows and the lighting and the class of drivers is just way better than it ever was.
So what comes to mind, Mike, at this 30-year anniversary of, and granted, I mean, you've accomplished so many things in your career. I know it's one of many, but we are at this fortunate place where on IMSA's 50th anniversary, well, we also get to look back 30 years ago and talk about this pretty awesome win you and the team secured. What comes to mind about this, realizing it's 30 years ago?
I miss Bob Wollek. I miss that era, and that was the 89 win was one of my favorite. And working with Jim was great, because we'd been together at that point 4 years, and the guys we had were a great team. BF Goodrich was a great sponsor. I just kind of missed that era of racing. It's just never can go back to that, but it was fun. It was in that particular race. I was really involved with trying to. Of course, we had the problems in practice, and so it was asses and elbows there trying to figure out what was wrong with the car. So and in the end, it all came right. So it was like a Hollywood movie. That was favorite. That was a good one.
I know that maybe the perfect final chapter to the story is you are working on and doing a full restoration on that race-winning chassis. And as Jim mentioned, it had gone on afterwards. It had gained a bunch of weight through paint or bodywork, this, that, and the other. And said, when this thing was in its 1989 trim, it was lightweight, fastest, baddest 962 ever, and can't wait for you to get the car back to its original configuration. So hopefully they can get back out and remind the world how awesome it was. Tell us about this project and this labor of love, and is there any sense of like, wait a minute, I thought I was done working on this thing. Back?
No, as it happened, I retired for a while, and then I got bored, basically not doing anything. And I moved here to Florida with my wife in 2017. And Roger Hawley at Orbit, he had Kevin Jeanette's open cockpit 966.
Yeah.
And him and his guys were too young to know anything about the car. So he asked if I would come and help him out with that. And while I was doing that, one of his customers had always been enthralled by the Miller car, and he kind of he got renewed interest and went and bought the car from the Mecum auction at Pebble Beach in September.
Yeah.
So it was a real surprise to me that he did it. And he just called Roger one day and he says, "Hey, I bought that car. I think you guys can work on it for me." And I said, absolutely. So he had the car shipped over to Jupiter, where his house is. And we went and looked at the car. He said, "Come on over and take a look at it." So he got a whole bunch of memorabilia and stuff with the car. One of the things he got was my old fire suit. It still had my name on it.
Wow.
And they gave him a whole bunch of notes and track notes and stuff that kept with the car. And I opened this book up, and here was all of these pages in my handwriting, and it was a real kick. It's really exciting to be doing this thing. And we sent it over to Kevin Jeanette at Gunner, and he redid the body for us, which was over time had taken a few hits and had been repaired, and probably not the best way. But Kevin got it straight, and we just got it back 2 days ago. So, meantime, we've been working on all the mechanical bits, and we hopefully will have it done to take it to Amelia Island in March.
Brilliant. Well, I know John Andretti said the one most meaningful thing he has from that race is not the trophy, obviously, but the steering wheel off the car. So, I don't know, you might be able to work out a lease agreement or something if you want to get the period correct steering wheel. We've been able to track that down through the podcast.
No, John's welcome to it. Steering wheel's a steering wheel. But we got most of the original pieces on our car, so that's enough, I think.
And that was our friends Jim Busby, Alvin Springer, John Andretti, and Mike Colucci, having watched the race when it took place. Yes. And so thankful that we have them ready, willing, and able to share the story today. John, as you might have heard in his voice, having come off of very significant surgery about a week before our call, definitely was summoning as much strength as he could, just all together. Some great men that achieved some great things, and also hopefully you enjoyed some of the funny tales and insider bits. A lot that I learned in here too. One of my favorite things, folks, you probably know. It's going back in time, talking to our legends, talking to our heroes, and bringing those stories forward. Maybe for some of you who haven't heard them before, and for those of you who were there, it's still just fun to reminisce. All right, I'm Marshall Pruitt. This is a Marshall Pruitt podcast brought to you by the Justice Brothers and Cooper Tires. Thank you for listening.